Good evening, Browns fans, and welcome to the OBR postgame show. The Browns are 13-6 winners today, thanks to a strong offensive start for the Browns and a defense that had Aaron Rodgers jittery all day. Pete Smith and I are here to talk about it. How you doing, Pete?
I'm conflicted, but I'll get through it.
Yeah, I know you will. As will all of us at the OBR who have mixed emotions about the win today against the Steelers, but beating the Steelers and knocking them off target for their playoff, that's a good thing, as a Browns fan. But longer term, there's some, conviction on the part of some folks that a better draft position would have been a better result. The Browns are now 6th, I believe, according to Tankathon, with the 28th pick in the round, as well as the Jaguars continue to annoyingly win. We have some interesting comments here in the chat room. Pete, what are your thoughts on the balance of beating the Steelers when they didn't want to lose and draft position?
I mean, look, I think the biggest win to me is if winning this game means that Kevin Stefanski ultimately wins his job for another year. And ultimately, I don't see any other scenario where you have that, because if you say this, that you're going to fire him after this, when the whole thing was you were allegedly undecided, then you are then saying this game had no meaning and it had no value.
Right.
So in that scenario, you are then better off losing, because you'd be better off in the long term for your draft position. Look, I mean, you have to be proud of the effort as a fan of watching this. I mean, whether it was, Albert Breer on Twitter eating his words, criticizing them against the Bears and saying, wow, this team's really fought against the Bills and now the Steelers, or, as much as I don't enjoy Tony Romo's commentary, he kept applauding the Browns for how hard they were playing. Like,
yeah,
another game where you had a bunch of guys on offense that people have never heard of. Sal Cannella caught his first ever NFL pass. He's mid-20s, I think. He's been in all kinds of professional leagues at this point. I mean, it's a great story for him to catch his first ever pass. But you were down to the studs of your offense. Harold Fannin is great for 2 drives, and then he's out of the game. After that, it's Jerry Jeudy, and that is literally about the only playmaker you've got, because everybody else is out, or you're losing multiple guards again in the game, and we finished the game with Zach Zinter. And then obviously defensively, again, fight. They fight. They play endlessly. I mean, we could talk just about Carson Schwessinger. Harold Fannin ultimately is ruled out with the groin, and everybody's sitting there watching Carson Schwessinger sort of hobble around in an ankle and basically like, please get him out. And on some level, I do sympathize, because the last thing you need is to have another, him suddenly get a more serious injury. But for somebody like that, I think he's earning the role that this team needs him to have, which is, I think his teammates are going to look at him and go, that guy's a leader. That guy's somebody we can look to and respect. And I think that's going to pay some dividends, ultimately moving to the future. So there's elements of this which are great. The problems I have are the Browns won the game and their offense was awful after the first 2 drives. And I don't necessarily blame the Browns and say, they didn't do they were just awful in a lot of areas. There's certainly some questions with some of the decisions that Shedeur Sanders made and some of the other stuff that happened. But like, just look at the total offense. There's very little there. That's sort of, you sit here and you go, you won the football game, but what did you really win? And I think in some ways you can look at this a little bit as Pyrrhic victory, but like, that's okay. Again, if it pays dividends, if it means something to these players and helps them, carry out the rest of the season, and into next year, that hopefully, again, this hopefully means Kevin Stefanski's going to be here from my perspective. Because if Kevin Stefanski's here, it means that a whole lot of these guys who are on this team are going to have jobs, or at least the possibility of having jobs next year. Whereas if the staff was fired, there are a bunch of players on this team who are, going to be looking for jobs elsewhere or potentially out of the league. Just how these things go. So, I mean, there's this element of being very aware of your sort of mortality in that respect. But like, you're not going to sit here and hate on the players for winning a football game and playing their hearts out. Like, that's what we asked them to do. So that part of it is frustrating, is great. The frustrating part is now the Browns pick 6th in the draft, which puts them in a very precarious spot given the issues they have. And unfortunately, the draft matters. And before people will go, well, tanking doesn't really work, I will point you to the Kansas City Chiefs, who have stopped giving any care about this NFL season. The playoffs. They are actively trying to lose, and they have a top 10 pick right now. The Kansas City Chiefs are 6-10 or whatever, are currently picked 10th. That's how prevalent this process has been. And mostly you're not tanking in the sense that you're trying to lose necessarily, in the true sense of we're Chicago Black Sox throwing games. You're usually protecting players who are hurt. and trying to make sure they don't get further hurt or anything else like that, which unfortunately has happened to the Browns. Quinshon Judkins injuries this year, Mike Hall Jr.'s injury last year are situations you desperately hope to avoid. But nevertheless, I love the way the win from the standpoint of the players. You know, Myles Garrett telling people like me, I don't care about the draft pick. Hey, that he gets to say that. And he gets to say that in part because any Steelers fan who ever wants to talk about Myles Garrett ever again, I'm just going to look at this game. I'm just going to point at it. Aaron Rodgers had one of the most cowardly performances I've ever seen in an NFL uniform ever. He was scared. He was terrified to do anything. The game is on the line, and he wouldn't even think to possibly hold on to the ball to see if anything else opened up. He threw it away. Threw it away on third down. He just said, "No, we'll get to the next one," and did nothing on fourth down either. Like the good part of this win is if the Steelers lose next week, oh man, it's gonna be a rough offseason in Pittsburgh. Because Aaron Rodgers, you know, you don't have to call it quitting. He was just a straight up coward. Yellow on Pittsburgh. That was it. And then Mike Tomlin has to answer a whole lot of questions. And I get it. DK Metcalf, not available. You don't have Calvin Austin. And ultimately, unfortunately, Darnell Washington broke his arm. So he's going to be out. But like, you have everything to play for. And the Browns are basically like, they're 3-12. Like, you can come kill us and we'll gladly die. And they couldn't get it done. Like, one of the all-time embarrassing coaching jobs by Mike Tomlin and performances ever. Like, and this is, you know, this for the people who are like, man, I wish the Browns had Mike Tomlin as their head coach. I'm just going to sit here and point at this. You want this guy to build your offense? Because that's what the Browns need. Just awful from Pittsburgh's standpoint. And God knows the Browns tried to hand him the game. Shedeur Sanders threw the ball. I mean, the one interception, he gets a pass because it was tipped and all this other. He just straight threw it to Nick Herbig, and Nick Herbig could not catch it. And then threw the other one, just preposterously threw it to the defender. It seemed like he was trying to get the Browns to lose, and God knows I was hoping he'd pull it off. But nevertheless, like that, and that's the other part that I get frustrated with is like, it would be so much better and more satisfying. And Shedeur Sanders on the first two drives was great. He was really, really good. But like everything else, you're sitting there. There were some good plays mixed in, but you can't come away from this game and going, yeah, Shedeur Sanders is our starter next year. There's no way. You can sit there and go, okay, we can see what he can do with an offseason and see if he can compete and win the job. But you cannot possibly sit here and go, we could just roll with Shedeur into next season as the unquestioned starter. It's just no franchise is serious. And what's interesting, this obviously happened before the game started, is there was a report out from Ian Rappaport or one of those basically saying, hey, the Giants are going to do their due diligence if they end up with the top pick. And they're going to look at Fernando Mendoza. They just took Jackson Dart, but they're going to look because they're a serious organization. They have to look at. And of course the Browns would too. They're not going to go, well, we've got Shedeur Sanders. We're not going to look at any of these guys. It's an insane posture to take. So it's a great win. I'm very curious to see if we're going to get any more crap about game balls after this one. But you're gonna have to go into the offseason, and now wherever the Browns up in the draft, you're still going to have to get a quarterback from somewhere. But for this, you can enjoy the win, and it's great. I couldn't be happier for the players and Kevin Stefanski.
Yeah. Kevin Stefanski may have saved his job, and as Josh points out, Mike Tomlin may have lost his, which is kind of strange given the two records of the two teams. I want to get to some of the comments that we've had in the chat here. I mean, your opinion about sacrificing draft position for a win to Steelers is probably going to be tied, you know, as a fan, very much to what you think about Shedeur Sanders. Because if you think Shedeur Sanders is definitively not the answer, you want to get that answer this offseason. And, going to sixth in draft position isn't going to get it done, most likely, for either Fernando Mendoza or Dante Moore, if you're a fan of Dante Moore. I think Eco OBR asks the operative question. He says Sanders looks like an NFL QB, then he does some stupid stuff like throwing that wounded duck across the field for a pick. can he be trusted to fix the stupid? I guess the question is it possible that, during the offseason with appropriate coaching and so forth, he'll stop making those mistakes? Or do you think that he's doomed to make poor decisions out of desperation in the years to come, Pete?
Only he really knows the answer to that. And he may not even know. Like, the reality is, like, you said the right word. It was desperation. After the Browns scored 10 points, they basically did nothing for the other 3 quarters. They got 1 field goal off of a Steelers turnover on their own end. And Shedeur Sanders, unfortunately, got to a point where he's like, I'm going to try to make something happen. And he threw that. And, even if the Browns get a better offensive line, even if they get more weapons, like, let's say in a world, and this is the part where I get very worried about potentially picking 5th or 6th. I'm not convinced that Carnell Tate's going to last that long, but let's say for the sake of argument, they have Carnell Tate and they've got a better line and Shedeur Sanders is there. At some point, there's going to be a game where things aren't going well. And he's going to have to make a big decision. He's going to have to make a big throw. And is he going to do that type of thing? And the answer is probably at some point he will. I don't know what's going to, in the same way that I don't know why he keeps scrambling and looking for contact. 7 yards short of the stick, and he's taking a big hit. And the Browns went for it. Okay, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But, like, you're 7 yards short. Why are you not sliding? I mean, I would simultaneously criticize Aaron Rodgers. Why on earth are you sliding feet first and not head first when you're right at the sticks in 3rd down and season on the line type stuff? And he was content to slide, be short on 4th and 1, and then they threw a fade to Scotty Miller against Tyson Campbell on 4th and 1. Like, that's your play call? You're going to try to fade up Tyson Campbell, who's been outstanding in this game, with Scotty Miller, who on his best day is a wide receiver 4. These are the things where I sit here and question. So, look, ultimately, Shedeur Sanders, there's a lot of things I think he can get better at. I'm encouraged by a lot of what he does in terms of seeing the field better. I thought he was reading the zone of the Steelers really well at points. But when, particularly when he's under pressure or when he's on an extended tour of frustration, at some point he gets it in his head, I'm going to make something happen. And unfortunately, he's finding out way too often that when he tries to do that, there's a good chance it's going to go badly for him, and the worst possible way as far as an interception. Now, he's lucky that ridiculous cross-field interception he threw that he should not throw if he had Cam Ward's arm, which incidentally reminded me of a interception that Cam Ward threw in college against Cal. Those are losing plays, and he's got to stop doing that stuff if he wants to be a serious NFL starter. And it did not kill the Browns. The Browns held up. Steelers missed the field goal they got the opportunity with, which was its own weird element to this, because if Chris Boswell just makes a kick, the Steelers probably win this game. But nevertheless, like, yes, I think Shedeur Sanders can get better. But the problem is I just don't think you can bet enough on – you can't bet him getting better to the point where you're like, I'm just going to forego all other options and say this is our guy. If for no other reason, just the way he handles his body. Even if you think Shedeur Sanders is great and you think he's going to be the best ever, despite the fact he's got like 10 picks since week 11, he is going to get himself hurt the way he plays because he just is very content to throw his body around and take just vicious hits. And he got bailed out a couple of times. I thought that roughing the passer call on Cam Hayward was soft. But and that wasn't Shedeur's fault, but like that's an incidental hit. That's the cost of doing business hit, not scrambling and taking shots to your throwing shoulder.
Right. Sanders, I was ready in that second quarter to say, who cares about draft position? We've got our quarterback, as hot as Sanders started off. I mean, he had a over 150 rating, as someone pointed out in the chat in the first quarter. It seemed to me, Pete, like he had been coached up very well about what to expect, from the Steelers and their base defense. But once he had a couple of those good drives, the Steelers changed something because the throws that Sanders seemed to think were there were no longer there. You know, did they, in your eyes, adjust their defense and throw Sanders?
There were a couple things that they did. One, they did do some changes in terms of disguises and try to throw him off, and it didn't catch him necessarily by surprise. It caused him to hold the ball a little bit longer, and that's been his MO. When he's not sure, he tends to hold on the ball and try to find space. The other thing they did is early on for like the first 2 drives, maybe even 3-4 drives, the offensive protection held up really well. It was not easy. It was tight quarters in there. There were a lot of situations where you're sitting there going, I don't know how he's going to sort of fit, but they were picking guys up pretty well and giving shorter time to find answers or pressures that were designed to have overloads. Like he knew where to go with the check down and stuff like that, which was good. Over the course of the game, their pressure became more problematic. Alex Highsmith had a really, really good game against Cam Robinson. Not only did he get sacks, and that one of them wasn't on Cam Robinson, it was just a stunt they executed really well, but he also got Cam Robinson to have some penalties as a result of the issues that he was causing. And as the pressure started to make an impact, both in terms of sacks, in terms of creating negative plays, Sanders started getting more stressed and playing worse. Even when it seemed, and I can't say for sure, it seemed like the rain was less problematic in the second half than the second quarter in particular. The second quarter seemed pretty bad. Didn't seem as bad in the second half, but he was still grinding. And this is part of the thing. Like the Browns can do so much in preparation. They can prepare and prepare and prepare. And that's usually what the first half gets you. Preparation and scheme and the script and all these things are against what you're accustomed to seeing. It's much more difficult when, you're trying to do this live fire and trying to coach him up on the sideline. Oh, they're trying to do this now. And the offensive line's trying to fix, and all these things are happening once. So typically your coaching and preparation really takes hold in the first half. And then the second half, it usually comes down to talent and effort and all the other stuff. And yes, adjustments matter and there's little coaching tweaks that can happen. But like by and large, I don't care what level of football, but certainly more prevalent in high school and college. You see it all the time. Like I'll use Ohio State as an example. How many games have you watched where like the first half is close and then Ohio State just destroys them because they just got more guys? That's been the case a lot with the Browns this year. I think this game in a lot of ways was trending in that direction, but the Steelers were just as bad in some of their stuff. But ultimately, yeah, they changed up some stuff. They gave him some problems. The pressure became more impactful and changed stuff up. While I'm on that topic, the part I would say is the defense, the changes the defense made from the first game to the second game were notable. Some of this had to do with the fact that DK Metcalf was obviously not playing and they were missing some guys. They played a ton of zone and they gave up short completions, but like early on in the game, the Steelers tried to go the exact same stuff they did earlier in the season. They tried to run rub routes. And they frankly should have gotten the one to Scotty Miller on the rub because they called a crappy OPI penalty that really shouldn't have been called, where the receiver clipped Trey Avery and they called OPI. That was just a good man beater that got the rub and was successful. So the Browns were like, okay, screw this. They don't have the athletes right now. We're going to play a whole lot of zone. And they played it well. And part of the reason they were able to do that and they weren't able to do it in the first game, keep in mind, the first time these two teams played, Tyson Campbell basically arrived that Wednesday.
Right.
The first game. So they had to be very simple. It was just man coverage. We're going to play straight man basically the whole way because we can't install a bunch of stuff because Tyson Campbell has been here 20 minutes. Now you got Tyson Campbell's been here. He's comfortable in the scheme. Obviously, Denzel Ward's back. He played a lot more zone, and they just took away most of the deep elements of the field. They got a couple plays up the middle, but like Campbell and Ward shut down their areas of the field and really put the clamps on Aaron Rodgers in that pass game, in addition to the fact that Aaron Rodgers was more than happy to basically bail on any play where he held the ball for more than basically 2 seconds.
Right. I want to deal with this question about Sanders that's coming up repeatedly in the chat, this notion about Sanders. And DDC 210 expresses it well. He says, Sanders isn't perfect by any means, but I don't see the harm in giving him 2026 to find out more. If he fails, then go get your guy in the 2027 draft, which, like all drafts 2 years away, is supposedly packed with high-quality quarterbacks. We'll see if that's the case, this time next year. But, Pete, it doesn't seem to me like Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski have that enough, quite enough confidence in their ability to retain their jobs if 2026 is bad. And so for them, if I was either of those guys, I would be hedging my bets by bringing in as many quarterbacks as I could, that have the potential to beat out Sanders.
Well, not only that, but you've got players in the locker room to consider. Like Mike Bloomgren has openly stated in the press conference, he's going to try to talk Joe Bitonio into coming back another year. And Joe Bitonio, whether the players responded to what Joe Bitonio has said or they sort of have the same opinion, Joe Bitonio went out there this past week and said, don't fire Kevin Stefanski. He's a good coach. Right. We need to build around him. If you then basically tell Bitonio and Garrett and Denzel Ward, we're just going to roll with Shedeur Sanders, and if he can't do it, we're just going to wait till 2027. You're already telling them that there's a good chance that you're throwing away a season. They don't have these seasons to throw away. And I'm certainly a believer that Myles Garrett can play until he's 40. I don't think Denzel Ward can, and Joe Bitonio, if he plays another year, that's probably going to be it. I mean, we're in this every year situation. And yeah, you can sit there and say the Browns need to play it for the long term, but they cannot plan for throwing away a third season in a row on the hope that one guy is going to figure it out. They have to be reasonable. Again, to just what I said, if Shedeur Sanders goes out there and tears his ACL in July, the season's now over? Like, just the way he plays is worrying in terms of just the amount of hits he takes. He's tough. Don't get me wrong, but here's the thing, and not comparing them in any other thing other than the amount of abuse they seem to be able to take. Deshaun Watson used to be the toughest guy in football. He famously drove to a game because it wasn't like recommended he fly to a game because he was so injured and played in it. He took a ton of abuse over the course of his career. Shedeur Sanders does the same thing. He gets beaten up. He got beaten up a ton in college and kept getting up and getting up. At some point, he's going to take the wrong hit and he's going to go down. And you cannot sit here and say, well, my season's over. And that's assuming he's going to take the growth you needed to be a great quarterback. So this may knock the Browns out for the draft. We'll see. If there's a scenario, if they love Ty Simpson, that Ty Simpson could be that option. They could, but if they forego the draft, they're going to have to get a veteran. I think Geno Smith makes a ton of sense through that vein. Malik Willis is going to be a free agent. There's going to be some options out there. The Browns cannot just go with Shedeur Sanders and say this is it. It's an unserious move by an unserious franchise at that point. They've got to do everything they can. And the thing is, and we've talked about this, if they nail the offseason, which is a lot, but in some ways, if you're not taking the quarterback, it's almost a little bit easier. If you're saying, for example, and again, let's say you get Carnell Tate, and then you can get a bunch of linemen between free agency and the draft, and you get a veteran quarterback like a Geno Smith or Malik Willis, and they compete with Shedeur Sanders. Like, you can talk yourself or see a scenario where the Browns then potentially compete for the postseason next year. They should absolutely do that. So they have to do everything they can to make this team better. They cannot, just from you can't just keep throwing away seasons for anyone. But the Browns have to be thinking in terms of winning and changing how people feel about them internally as well as externally. They have to be able to attract free agents. If they get a guy like Geno Smith or a guy like Malik Willis, for example, and that's like their first big move of the offseason, that may start some momentum for them, getting people excited about potentially playing in Cleveland. So there's just too many elements to it where you just can't sit here and go, we're just going to roll with this and hope for the best, because it's just not a real plan. As the Browns saw this year, Shedeur Sanders has been really tough in games, but he missed time twice in practice before the season and during the season just from practicing. So let's see. And as far as Tate at 6 goes, man, fingers crossed. The Giants could easily be in a situation where they take him before the Browns do.
Yeah. There are people, particularly folks who have a lot of faith in Sanders, who are listening right now and responding in the chat and, sort of saying, you guys are idiots. The problem is not the quarterback. It's the offensive line and the wide receiver. And I wouldn't say that Shedeur Sanders is in a position where he's a negative force on the team. He's improving. We simply don't know how high his ceiling is. And he's obviously working very hard, and he delivered some great drives today. But at the same time, you don't know if he's a guy who's going to take you to the Super Bowl or not. Is it not contradictory, Pete, to say that, yes, we're going to use the draft to improve the wide receiver room and the offensive line room, as everyone badly knows needs to happen, and then maybe not spend a high draft pick on a quarterback and go out and get somebody like Malik Willis or Geno Smith or something like that as a backup plan if Shedeur doesn't maturate like his fans hope he does?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens with the rest of the college football playoff, because Ty Simpson's going to play against Indiana, and if they go out and beat Indiana, this whole conversation gets flipped, especially if he plays really, really well and they keep going. But as I sit here today, I'm in the veteran and Shedeur camp right now, and try to make my splash later and try to build up the rest of the team and then get into a position where the Browns can then try to do something akin to what they did, what other teams have done, like the Buffalo Bills, like the Kansas City Chiefs, where you traded up to get your guy. I am opposed to trading up. The Browns will absolutely investigate. They did it last year with Cam Ward. They will absolutely investigate the potential for trading up. But my preference would be use your picks or trade down and get more picks and just keep the gravy train rolling and build up your team. But look, I've said that, like, I don't throw Geno Smith's name out there as like defeat. I think with a real offense, he could be pretty good. I think what he's dealing with in Las Vegas is a joke. I think he's a better quarterback than that. I think Malik Willis is interesting. Are either of those guys likely to take you to the Super Bowl? I would tend to doubt it. But can they make your team credible and get you to the postseason? Absolutely. Geno Smith's already proven that. So, if you get into a situation where, he can be a guy that can sort of compete. And look, the other part about this is if you bring in Geno Smith and Shedeur's better than him, great. Then you've got him there too. Like I none of this to me is throwing away Shedeur Sanders. I want to see him develop. I want to see him get better. But what I'm not going to do is say he's absolutely going to be better and be good enough, because I don't think that's realistic. So I'm going to make sure I have multiple options, multiple swings at this thing, just like they did this year, albeit differently and with more credibility. But yeah, I want to use those other assets. I want to build up the rest of the team, certainly. But you've got to get something else in there. And the benefit of the schedule of the offseason is this win in a lot of ways makes it a whole lot easier, because the Browns are going to get to March and the league year is going to open up, and they're going to have to be in the market for a quarterback. They can't sit here and wait for the draft and hope for the best. So they're going to have to go get a quarterback. And then you're going to know ahead of time, okay, they've got this, so now they can build up the rest of the team. Okay, which makes it easy. You're going to know well ahead of time what they're sort of looking at. And if something weird happens in the draft, they can roll with it. But they're going to try to get everything in line so then they are in a position to take best player available and really attack the offense, which is clearly where the needs are for this team.
Right. We're getting some vociferous comments in the chat room. I was asked if I'm trying to replay 2025 with my comment about veteran quarterbacks. No, not at all. I'm trying to replay 2025. This team needs a lot of help on the offensive line and in the wide receiver room. And as far as the quarterback position is concerned, my position is that Sanders has done fairly well this year. We don't know how high his top line is. And if you want to go win a Super Bowl, go look at a team, teams with franchise quarterbacks like Justin Herbert. I watched Justin Herbert last night, and I can't say that Shedeur Sanders is near where Justin Herbert is. I don't know if he'll ever get there, right? And until you have that guy, you have to continue seeking that guy, even though you realize that you have other problems on your team. Now, one of the questions we got was from D-Boots on our forums. He says, other than that one horrible, no good, very bad interception Sanders threw, did he show progress? It felt to me like he did, but when you've lost Judkins, Njoku, and Fannin, it doesn't leave many playmakers for him to throw to. And this is certainly true. He still had Judy, he still had Tillman, but he was short on playmakers. I listened to Tony Romo and Jim Nantz make excuses for the Aaron Rodgers and the Pittsburgh Steelers all afternoon because they'd lost DK Metcalf. But likewise, the Browns had lost a lot of playmakers too, and that has to be factored in, right, Pete?
Yeah, look, I think he did really well in the first couple drives, and then there were some plays mixed in there that were really good. If Nick Herbig catches that ball and runs it back to the end zone, most everybody's done on this conversation. And the Browns, if the Browns lose and Nick Herbig's interception does it, everybody's moving on. Everybody's going to say, well, the Browns lost. They're now locked in potentially for their top 2 pick, and they're going to be on to the next quarterback most likely. But they won. And this is the difference between winning and losing, what it does, because you can have sort of convenient amnesia for certain things when things are going well, and you remember all the bad stuff when you lose. So that play was pivotal because it was awful throw, awful decision, awful everything, and Nick Herbig just dropped the ball. That other interception was genuinely terrible. And I think just based on sort of karma, it sort of worked out that he had 2 picks. That's what he should have had. The other one was obviously a fluky thing off helmets. But the problem is, I think he's got 10 picks since week 11. He does make a lot of mistakes, and granted, he's learning, and that's good. I do think he makes progress every week. I do think there are elements of his game where you can see him get better. I think his pocket awareness was really strong in the first quarter, even in tight spaces. I think there's elements to that where he's getting better. I thought he did his best game so far to me, particularly for the first almost half of reading and diagnosing zone coverages and just understanding where the holes are in the defense. But the problem, but that's the thing. I can talk all day about stuff I think he's getting better at. And I think I see a guy who's so excited about getting coached because I don't think he's gotten any of this instruction ever. And he's learning all the stuff that he's never been even considered since joining the NFL. And that's not a shot at anybody. I think that's just the reality of his college situation. It was, they're trying to win football games, not necessarily trying to develop a quarterback. The Browns, they're trying to win football games, but they really want to develop a quarterback. So they're going to do everything they can to try to emphasize areas they can get better. I think he's making strides, but none of those strides are going to be enough to sort of be like, we're ready to roll with this guy. Because if they were, they wouldn't be picking in the top 10. They'd be a better football team. Now, again, the fact of the matter is that the one thing we've constantly said that Shedeur could do to make sure that he was going to be in the picture for the quarterback job next year was win. Well, he did that. So now he's suddenly in the picture because now the Browns aren't really in a great position to pick a quarterback unless they are willing to trade up and potentially mortgage a lot of assets that they may not be able to afford. So he's already doing the things he needs to do to make sure he at least stays in the picture, but there's so much more work he's got to do. And I think there's a fundamental just disconnect in terms of what people understand he could do coming into the NFL versus what he could actually do. And that was a pretty sizable gulf because he's never read defenses the way he has to now. He's never been tasked with some of the stuff he's been doing. He never played under center, which I think he's gotten significantly better at. I think he's gotten really good at the stretch boot stuff. All that's fine. And the offensive line is what it is. And there are a lot of issues, but The pass he threw to Nick Herbig, nobody was pressuring him. The pass he threw to that ridiculous crossfield pass, there's no situation defensively that's going to tell you that's a good idea. Those are things that, like, that's day one stuff. You cannot do this stuff. So that therein lies the devil in the details. He's making progress, but he's got to make a lot more of it, especially if he wants to win the job. So, like, I cannot say this enough because people think I like hate this guy. I'm excited to see what he can do with an offseason. I genuinely enjoy watching his development curve in terms of his NFL, in terms of what he's doing. Like, I'm excited to watch him play against the Cincinnati Bengals. But that doesn't mean I'm going to bet my franchise on him in the same way that, like, hey, I'm really curious to see what KT Leviston can do on a week in and week out basis. I really want to right tackle. I really, I cannot stress enough how much I want to right tackle. Like, that's the thing. I can enjoy the development of some of these young players and still be like, I want to upgrade. And that's where I'm at. Like Luke Whippler, I appreciate what he's doing. But if you tell me Ryan Linderbaum can walk in here and be the starting center, I'm going to take it.
Yeah, understood. I mean, that's the nature of the NFL, right? I mean, you're always looking to upgrade every single position, even if you happen to like a player, right? Because you're always looking to get better. Maybe Myles Garrett is an exception, but pretty much every other player on the roster, if the team can upgrade somehow, they would, and move forward from there. I want to talk a little bit about Aaron Rodgers and the defense. A comparison was made, which I put up on the screen, that Shedeur Sanders outplayed Josh Allen and he outplayed Aaron Rodgers. And if you look at the scoreboard, it's debatable. Rodgers threw for 168 yards, Sanders threw for 186, but Sanders threw 2 picks, but he also had an interception. Quarterback rating was about the same. I don't know. But a big factor in that, the fact that it was so competitive, is the Cleveland Browns defense, right? In both of those games, made it difficult for quarterbacks, as they always do. And it seemed to me that the Steelers were, I'm not going to say that they're more interested in avoiding the headlines than winning the game, but it sure looked like, Rodgers had a 2.21 time to throw. I think he finished even lower than that, according to Jack Duffin. He's getting rid of the ball amazingly fast, much faster than league average against the Browns. And that, to me, just seems like a real issue with the Steelers' strategy.
You don't have to say it. Myles Garrett did in his postgame. Said straight up, the Steelers and Aaron Rodgers seemed more interested in making sure he didn't get the record than winning the football game and getting the playoffs. And who can really argue with him based on what we saw? Did they look like a team for basically the entire second half? They didn't look like a team that was trying to win. They played scared and just refused to do anything. And that's why I say it sort of looks like, we'll see what happens this week, but with the Ravens Steelers game, but like that game asks a lot of questions of the Steelers all of a sudden. Like there were a few weeks ago, there were a whole bunch of loud Steelers players interfighting and all this stuff, and they went on a little run and things moved over. I think this game opens all those old wounds back up. I think a lot of people are going to be a lot more pissed at DK Metcalf now with his stupid suspension.
Right.
And then the Steelers apparently decided not to void any of his guarantees, which I'm sure Steelers fans aren't too thrilled with, even though it's not their money, but still, like the idea of, this guy may cost you the playoffs, and you're going to he's not going to lose any of that money. It's going to be a tough pill to swallow, other than the 2 game checks. That's the weird element to this, is like for years and years and years, the Browns would lose to the Steelers and a coach would get fired. And now, the Browns are really good at home against the Steelers for whatever reason. It's incredibly weird. And it's now 2 rookie quarterbacks who've beaten this team at home. DTR did it, and now Shedeur Sanders has done it. Like, and neither of them were good in those games, although, DTR, to his credit, had a really nice fourth quarter game-winning drive in his game. But, like, it asks the same questions that Steelers fans are constantly asking. And everybody sits there and goes, how could you possibly want to fire this guy who never has a losing season? And they go, because we do this every year. This is all we ever do. And we lose to stupid teams we shouldn't lose to. And then we don't win any playoff games. And, this is the whole thing. So far be it, that's the one delicious part about it for me. I the draft position, all this other stuff. I love these type of headlines. Like I loved the many, many weeks of is George Pickens the worst trade of all time stuff. I enjoy it. So this is going to be another awful game for the Steelers in the headlines. And I'm sure, Mike Tomlin will say something pithy and quick in his post-game press conference and whatever. And ultimately people will move on. I don't think they will fire him, by the way. I think the Steelers are too cheap. But I also but they've got major questions to answer. Like, where's this thing going? That team's old. It's overpaid on defense. There's a lot of questions you have to answer. And talking with Joe on our show, I asked a pretty simple question. Who would you rather be right now? We both agree we'd rather be the Browns. And you can sit there and go, well, the Steelers could win the division next week. And I get it. But where's this thing going?
Yeah.
You could say about the Browns. Well, the Browns are, they're 4-12 and all this other stuff, and they're terrible and their offense is terrible. Okay. They're going to have two first-round picks. They're going to have starting to get a bunch of money back. They got a lot of young talent. They had a great rookie class. All these things that are going in their favor. If they can pay it off, they're going to be in contention. Where the Steelers have to confront a whole lot of questions with their franchise, which it's fun for me. But now the Browns got to pay it off.
Right. Okay. So Rodgers. The Steelers' game plan played a role in this win by the Browns. And, you have to be happy every time you beat the Steelers. And, there's still the potential that the Browns could be aggressive to go up and get a quarterback in the draft. They got, ammo on the draft board to use to move up aggressively to try to get a quarterback. So that's certainly an option. JB says, lull, too much emphasis on the game. Steelers didn't have Metcalf. That was Pittsburgh's X factor. And Sanders doesn't have in place all the people around him to do what needs to be successful. You all are clowns. I think we've answered both of those. I think we've admitted that missing Metcalf hurt the Steelers tremendously, and that Sanders doesn't have the crew around him that he needs. That doesn't mean that you still don't swing for a quarterback you think is going to take you to the Super Bowl. You may not get one this year, but you have to at least go into the offseason thinking that is your objective. A question from Julian Hawes. He says, do you think Dart sucks and the Giants should draft a new QB after he threw for 33 yards? And this is part of it. Yeah.
I think the Giants it depends where the Giants are going to finish. But if the Giants finish with the number one overall pick, they absolutely have to consider Fernando Mendoza and Dante Moore. They absolutely do. Let's ignore one. They have to weigh it against how good they think Jackson Dart is. Unquestionably, if they come out and decide that Fernando Mendoza is better, they should take Fernando Mendoza, and then they can trade Jackson Dart. If they want to be just logical about it, Jackson Dart has been evaluated for a concussion 5 times in his rookie year, and his statement on it is, "I'm not going to change the way I play." So, just from a health standpoint, they have to investigate this possibility. Nothing Jackson Dart has done stops them from considering the possibility that they might want to draft Fernando Mendoza or Dante Moore. They absolutely have to do that due diligence. That it'd be absolutely ridiculous. And here's the thing. I think the Giants are still winning that game, but they desperately, in some ways, I think they desperately want to win that game because they don't want to be the team that it goes, well, we kept Jackson Dart and we traded or whatever, and then Fernando Mendoza goes on to be Peyton Manning or whatever, whatever. And Jackson Dart doesn't, because then you are forever tied to that element. So that's been my main case all along. The Giants absolutely have to do the work on Fernando Mendoza and if he declares Dante Moore. Absolutely have to. So the Browns sure as hell don't have an excuse not to do it for the sake of a 5th-round pick that's kind of shown some progress. Like, this is the point that you have to be smart as an organization and cover all your bases. You cannot do what the Chicago Bears did and say, oh, Caleb Williams, and then stack the deck and not really even take an honest look at Drake May, which is what happened. And Caleb Williams is a really talented quarterback, and he's doing much better under Ben Johnson, and they're going to win the division, and they're doing really well. But Drake May might win the MVP, and Ryan Poles is going to forever be judged on that selection. So absolutely the Giants have to consider this. Everybody has to. If the Tennessee Titans, obviously they've won out of position, but if the Tennessee Titans had finished with the number 1 pick with Cam Ward, they absolutely have to consider that possibility because you ended up with the number 1 overall pick. That's how you have to function as an organization. You have to consider all the possibilities because you've got 4 months until the draft. What else are you going to do other than figure this thing out? You cannot just blindly go, I'm not even going to consider any outside possibility and just go, we've got our guy. That's a terrible way for any organization to operate. I know that's not how the Browns operate, at least with the current people they have in place. They consider all the options, which they should. That's just smart planning. And the Giants still may end up being like, no, Dart's our guy. But it would not shock me in the least if he wasn't. Because, just using that as an example, allegedly, Jackson Dart was Brian Daboll's guy, not really Joe Shane's guy. And if Joe Shane's going to stay there, Joe Shane may not necessarily be too thrilled with the idea of being like, we're just going to roll with Dart. And he may want to consider Mendoza. You have to consider the option. It would be insane not to.
Right. The Giants are still winning that game. In fact, 17-3 over the ridiculous Raiders at this point. Ty Talk 15 asked an interesting question. Getting out of sort of the meta level of talking about quarterbacks, should you go get one or whatever. He gives us an actual option. And he says, would you rather have Geno Smith and the 2 first-round picks or give up those picks plus more for Mendoza? And I think it's a relevant question, but again, very much tied to what you think right now of Shedeur Sanders.
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem is like you could tie yourself up in the knots and go like, well, would I trade the 2nd pick in the draft last year for 5th pick in Mason Graham, Quinshon Judkins, and then use this pick this year for Fernando Mendoza? And under those circumstances, I might be inclined.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't like to look at draft picks, and this is where, I don't like to look at draft picks you've gotten in trades as sort of free. They are real assets. They have value. You shouldn't trade them as, well, they're just sort of there and you can use them because, hey, if we didn't make this move, we wouldn't have it in the first place. So it's just like extra. I don't like that thought process. So the short answer is I don't know the answer to that yet. My inclination right now is just to say I'd rather have 2 first-round picks. But I haven't done enough work on Fernando Mendoza to sort of get to that point. But I could see a scenario where I would be. But the problem is if I get to that point, chances are there's not going to be a chance to get him. So, that's where I sit here and go, if the Raiders get the first pick, I would happily allow them, help them out of their Geno Smith situation in that scenario. Yeah, like it's tough. Like we'll get through the process and this will take till like February or March before you have all the information necessary to make judgments on these quarterbacks between film and everything else. But if he's that good, I totally get it. But as we sit here today, I'd rather have the picks because I want to get that extra picks worth of value in terms of a player or trade down and get more draft picks. If you can guarantee that guy is the answer, great, then it's an easy decision. But the problem is, I desperately want to have that ability to get help in the form of, at 31st, even if the Jags won the Super Bowl, not going to happen, but whatever. Even if it's 32nd pick and I could get a good offensive lineman, like I'm all about that scenario. So like, that's where it gets tough. So it's a good question. It's just, I don't have a great answer for you yet, but as we see here today, I'd probably rather have the draft picks and Geno.
That makes sense. Let's go with a question from Iris JT on the forums. asked us about Rocket Sanders and whether we see Rocket Sanders as the RB3 next season. He really likes the guy and wanted to know our thoughts about him.
I like Raheem Sanders. I was excited about him in the draft last year. I was amazed that he sort of went as late as he did, and then was thrilled when the Chargers were sort of forced to waive him. The Browns got him as a waiver claim. I think he's got a shot to win that job. I suspect the Browns will bring in more competition to fight with him to potentially see what they can get in that. You know, I know Jack Duffin's pumping the idea of signing a guy like Tyler Algier from the Falcons. And if they can get Algier at the price that Jack is talking about, I'm all on board. I'm a little bit worried that people are going to say Algier is better than what Jack's projecting and paying more than that. But I love the price figure he's throwing out there. But like Raheem Sanders you're seeing, that's what I saw in college. He's a battering ram. He's a little bit better in the passing game than you think he is. You know, he fights for extra yardage. You know, I like having a back that does those types of things because I love Quinchon's talent, but he wants to cut and juke and do some of these other things. And there are times when you just like having a dude who's just going to go in there and go, I got to get the yard. I'm going to get the yard no matter whatever it takes. And there's certainly a value to that. You know, some of this will depend on how the Browns decide to build their offensive line. You know, if they get a bunch of big hog mollies that are just like trying to run block and knock people off the ball, Sanders gets even more intriguing for me. You know, not to say he can't run zone because I think he can, but if you're more, I won't say finesse, but just say movement based and more athletic, I suppose, as opposed to necessarily being able to lean on guys, then maybe he's not as interesting to me. But I do think there's a value in a guy like the way he runs, the way he plays, and particularly why the style he plays with, given what the Browns have in Dylan Sampson and in Quinshon Judkins. And what makes that more interesting is, you know, the Browns had this guy play week one, has been inactive then the next 14, 15 weeks. And then, you know, we're all sitting there going, why is this guy in the active roster? And then these past 2 weeks, he's shown you why the Browns did not want to expose him to potentially a waiver claim or other team's practice squad. He's interesting. So I absolutely want to see what this guy can do in another offseason and training camp and all that stuff, because I think there's real ability in there. But it wouldn't surprise me if they also hedge their bets, whether that's a free agent like a Tyler Algier or an undrafted free agent or some other cheap free agent who maybe is more pass protection oriented, catch the ball in the backfield type. But like if Dylan Sampson can do some more of those things, he can certainly do the catch out of the backfield stuff. But pass protection is the question you've sort of got to figure out. Right.
Another question, this one from David. He says, speaking of trading down, what are the chances Barry does that now? You know, I think that's probably very reliant on the offer he gets. But
yeah, I mean, look, the question is going to be what's on the board and premium positions. And, you know, if the Browns are picking fifth, you know, what's sitting there that people want? You know, outside of the quarterbacks, you look at the other premium positions. So if Dante Moore declares, it stands to reason that you're going to have at least 2, potentially 3 quarterbacks go in the top 10. Outside of that, the next premium position that I think is going to go super, super high is wide receiver and Cardell Tate. Ruben Bain has really short arms. This is going to hurt him. Like, there's no getting around this. Maybe he still goes in the bottom of the top 10, but there are going to be teams that are terrified of Ruben Bain. And I've seen videos to suggest why they would be scared. Arvell Reese is going to be a big topic, but what is he and how many teams can see the vision with him? Right. Because we've seen guys like him get put on teams that don't know what they're doing and then just be nothing. Like, and Arvell Reese deserves a ton of credit, but like Arvell Reese wasn't this guy until he got with Matt Patricia. That's not to say he was bad by any stretch last year, but now it's the difference between what was Arvell Reese last year and what is he now? Now he's we're talking about him as potentially the top overall player in the entire draft type player in Matt Patricia's scheme. Who's the team that's going to have that vision for him? It's not going to be the New York Giants. They just took Abdul Carter. They're probably going to trade Kayvon Thibodeau. They've got Brian Burns. They're not going to take another one of those guys. So who's the team that's going to be interested in that? Then you get to a guy, not a premium position, Caleb Downs.
Mm-hmm.
How high is he really going to go? Everybody's going to go, oh, of course he's going to go in the top 10. He might go top 5. Kyle Hamilton didn't. Ed Reed certainly didn't.
Right.
Not very many of those guys go that high. And so who's going to be the team that's saying we're willing to take that player, and we're not only willing to take him, we're willing to go up and get him? The offensive lineman, Spencer Fano's got a real shot to go high. Francis Mauigoa from Miami. A lot's going to depend on where people really believe he can play. If he's a tackle, he's probably going to go in the top 10. If he's a guard, it's probably more like 15 to 20. So that's where you sort of run. Is there a corner that jumps out as anybody as a top pick? Not really. The kid at LSU is really impressive, but the top rated corner for most people didn't even play this year. What other positions are we talking about? The Clemson defensive tackle. I don't think he's as good as Mason Graham was last year. So is he going to go that high? So when you go through that sort of checklist of guys, you start going, oh my God, this is a really short list. And this gets very worrying, particularly in a world where I'm sitting here thinking, oh, the Browns are in a great spot because they're just going to be able to sit here and get Carnell Tate. He could go as high as 3rd.
Yeah, he could.
In that scenario. And that's the problem you run into. So the board will be a determining factor on how this goes. If there's defensive players that everybody loves and the Browns can potentially get interest in, if Ty Simpson plays his ass off this last stretch and suddenly the Browns are like, well, we don't love Ty Simpson, but we're happy if anybody else does. There's a lot of different factors. So does trading down become more of a conversation? Potentially. I'll be honest. I thought it would have been the conversation. The biggest conversation was going to be if the Browns finished in the second pick in the draft and Dante Moore declared. I thought the biggest conversation of the entire offseason was going to be, do you take Dante Moore? Do you trade?
Mm-hmm.
And for all the reasons that you'd be worried about a redshirt sophomore, the variance and all those other things. But at 6, a little more complicated, and it may just be white knuckling it until Carnell Tate, hoping to God he somehow lasts that long. And if not, then you're sitting there going, please trade down and then take a guy like Mekhi Lemon. We shall see. It's really difficult to project just because of the way this class is made up. It's talent. This class absolutely has talent. But when you talk about the positions that matter in terms of when you talk about taking them to the top of the draft, it's just not as loaded there as you'd like it to be. Whereas 2027 from here, you can sit here and go, Jeremiah Smith, and there's about 7 other receivers that are really well thought of, and a couple other quarterbacks, and the defensive end edge rusher guy from South Carolina, Dylan Stewart, who's, there's a bunch of these guys in this camp where we're sort of already penciling them in. And whether they actually live up to that hype, we shall see. But mapping those positions out really matters quite a bit.
Yep. Let's take another question from Ty Sox. This one, he said, Romo said he discussed with Shedeur Sanders about starting his eyes in the right place. And the question is that really a thing? It sounded like a thing to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're in a pure progression read system, this is obviously a big topic the quarterbacks were talking about, then you're just going to go down the line. You're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and go where it goes. If you're talking about a concept where you're splitting the field in half, your pre-snap read may determine where you want to start. And if you start on the wrong side and you miss the open play, then your eyes were clearly in the wrong place on that point because you were trying to prejudge what was happening. That's why teams use pre-snap motion, or one of the many reasons people use pre-snap motion and shifts and all these other things to try to get as much of a key what the defense is going to do pre-snap so that it helps put the quarterback's eyes in the right place. So it's not as simple as, and you could make it this simple theoretically and go, hey, this is the play. Your eyes are on the corner here, then to the safety, then to something else. Or your eyes are flat defender to the corner or front side to backside safety, whatever. Depending on what play you're running, your eyes may, depending on what you get, if a guy's pressed up outside here, and that'd be normally your number one, that may send you to another thing. Well, if as you're getting your cadence, that guy backs off and he's no longer pressing up, and now you've sort of read it wrong, it changes where your eyes potentially should have been. So absolutely, that's a thing. Absolutely, it's something that you want to get better and better at, which is why, all the talk about the pure progression stuff is in a way designed to make it easier because it tries to eliminate some of the elements of pre-snap reads and disguise coverages because everybody's changing the picture from pre-snap, post-snap. However, the more you know about what teams are trying to do, even if it's just the habits they have and some of the different things they want to do, that will give you hints as to where you should start, where you should finish, and those types of things. So it's definitely a thing. It's an interesting conversation. I wish he would have gotten, that's one of those things you'd like more detail in what was said, but it's a pre-production meeting. You're not going to get a whole lot of stuff because they don't want to divulge too much,
right?
Gets into trade secret stuff. But it's an interesting conversation, and would be one that would have been a good question in the press conference for somebody like Shedeur Sanders, or something that if you ask him, coming into next season, what's been your progression in terms of getting your eyes in the right place? Where is it this year compared to last year? Like, that might get you a really interesting answer. Who knows?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be the type of thing that gets pursued as much as I'd like to see in the local media, but maybe that'll change in the future. If you have enjoyed this broadcast, or even if you hated it in a way that made you feel good, please give us a like and a subscribe on YouTube. We would really appreciate it. If you really like the OBR and want to help support our work, use that little QR code in the upper left-hand corner to go to our subscription page and subscribe so that you can talk to Pete directly in our forums, or even talk to me if you have to, as well as Sam Penix and Jack Duffin and Fred Greetham and all the other experts that we've accumulated over at the OBR. So please give that your consideration. Sure would appreciate it. Thanks for listening tonight as the Browns win 13-6 over the Pittsburgh Steelers. And we hope to see you again tomorrow night, where we have the Gang of Three gathering at 7:15. And we will see you then. For Pete Smith, I'm Barry McBride from the OBR. Have a good evening. We'll see you tomorrow.